Hey everybody, Dr. Dusa here. I'm here with the famous from the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast. Doug Brignole. We're going to talk about him in a second, but I just want to thank everyone for the happy birthday wishes. Yesterday was number 57. It's just like every other day. Every day is like a birthday. You've won lotto if you wake up. That's the way.
Yeah, exactly.
The kids, I don't know if you get this, Doug, but they'll call you the kid in the gym says, "Hey, I want to look as good as you when I'm your age," and then you got to tell them, "Well, you don't look as good as me now."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's not always like that, but I'm really happy to have Doug here. You know, we were just talking as we do before we get on, and I was saying it's important. His work is very important. He's just published his book. Is it The Physics of Fitness? Did you change it a little bit?
We changed the name. Yeah, it used to be The Physics of Fitness, and then the publisher and I. Well, the publisher requested it and recommended it to change it to The Physics of Resistance Exercise.
Okay.
So it's a little bit more specific. Fitness
Right.
is pretty broad, right? It includes cardiovascular and all kinds of things. I like The Physics of Fitness because it was phonetic.
Right. Yeah, well, that's important.
But The Physics of Resistance Exercise does sound more scholarly.
Well, you were very kind to let me download it over a year ago, and I read it, and it's quite a tome. There's a lot to it, and as we were saying off camera, the good thing about you, well, number one, there's nothing like it anywhere, and I compare you. I think I advertise you as one of the brilliant men in fitness and bodybuilding today, and I put you right up there with guys like Arthur Jones, Harold Zinkin, Joe Weider. You know, there's not many. Trailblazers, icebreakers, whatever you want to call it, people who created. And you bring up a lot of, it's a little light to say that you bring up salient points. You do a lot more than that. But you've been a top level bodybuilder, iconic bodybuilder. I remember you're a little older than me. And I remember seeing you in the magazines when I was 16 and you were 19 and you were a teenage champion, which I wanted to be one. It was just like I saw Gaspari and Mike Quinn. And I said, well, this is never going to happen for me. How did these guys, but at least, you presented a very high bar, which you still do because you're 60 and you still compete and you're still in top level form. And that's another great thing. But let's start, we'll go on a little, John Fox been waiting for this one. We have Joe Fulco here saying hello. Joey.
Hey,
Fulco.
Joey, how are you, buddy?
Yeah, Joe was on the podcast along with his daughter, who was on.
Fantastic.
She's on The Voice, not American Idol, The Voice, the top level singer, and she was a finalist. So we had to have her on.
I know Joey, of course.
She had to come on and sing a song. We're not going to ask you to sing though, Doug, unless you can.
Thank goodness.
If you want to, you could do whatever.
I wish I could.
All right, so we had sad news this week. Rick Drasin, another iconic man from fitness, passed away, and you knew him well. You were a very good friend.
Right. Yeah. I would say he was among my best friends. We did a lot of shows together. I think we did somewhere around 30 or 35 shows together. I'm not exactly sure. I think maybe Rich Piana was on his show more times than I was, but no one else was. I think I was on it more times than anybody else other than Rich Piana.
You're already receiving plaudits here, Doug. Doug hasn't even told us anything yet, and Doug is awesome.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
So anyway, Rick was a great guy. Obviously, he had a lot of adventures, right? He was, an early Gold's Gym guy, right? So he was an early Arnold, Frank Zane era witness, right? And then, of course, he drew the Gold's Gym logo, which became, I think, as I understand it, the most seen logo in the world right now.
I think it was the most sold T-shirt at one point.
Something like that, right? And of course, it was a simple sketch of a bald guy with a barba that was bent, and he drew it on a napkin.
In a restaurant, I think.
At a restaurant, Zuber's, I think it was called, or I think it began with a Z. Anyway, so of course, he had the wrestling adventures, and he had the television commercials, and he had, parts in movies, and, he met so many different people. He was obviously just, one of the people that had more adventures, more diverse adventures in the weight training, powerlifting, wrestling, fitness world than just about anybody else.
He again, we lost Franco Colombo
right
about a year ago, right around now, I think it was, and and Ed Corney before that.
Right.
And that's why I'm glad I have this. I listed you, and I think this is number 40 or 41, and I'm lucky. Nobody's told me no yet. I've had all the legendary people in bodybuilding and fitness, and
well, that's a tribute to you.
Well, I thank you. At least I'm not repelling anybody anyhow. But I think I wrote that. I think I sent you a personal message. Doing this is almost like going through the pages of Muscle Builder when in the 70s.
Well, look at technology. I mean, if we didn't have Facebook, if we didn't have Zoom, we wouldn't be doing this right now.
None of this would ever happen. No. You're right. But I also think it's important that we chronicle these guys while they're still here. And I hate to be a soothsayer. Hopefully they're going to be here for a long time, but someday they won't be. So I think this is a good thing, and people get information from a wide spectrum and span of time. So,
and the thing is, I mean, a lot of the things that we record either photographically or in video, while we're doing it, we don't think it's going to matter later.
No, that's true. I mean, you never do.
The pictures that were taken of me when I was 22 years old, winning Mr. California, I thought would never matter.
I wanted to, it's funny you mentioned that because I wanted to use the story. Frank Zane always said, it's not who's the biggest, it's who's the most complete. And you had a good story about that contest when you went backstage.
Oh, that's right.
Well, first of all, Doug competed he still competes. I mean, he's competed up until recently, but he started in 1979. I'm looking at muscle memory here. And he's won the overall Mr. California.
He started in 76.
76. Okay, well, they don't have everything. If they don't have a full panoply of who competed, they won't put it up. But he's won the Mr. Universe, Mr. America, and he's competed all over the world. So, he walks the walk and talks the talk, or whatever that adage is. So we could talk a little bit about that. But I think one of the things was you were more quality. You weren't, the guys now are, you're about 5'10".
5'10".
Yeah, guys compete at 280 now at that weight. Yeah. Of course, you weren't.
When I competed in the California, I was 184.
Right. So what happened when you went backstage and you're wearing a tracksuit?
I was wearing an Adidas warm-up suit, and Doug,
not to interrupt, but when you won that show, if you won the California, you were the favorite to win the Mr. America.
That was what they said. Yeah, well, because California was one of the probably 2 or 3 most competitive states.
Right.
So if you won California, I don't know what the history had been, but probably historically, people who won California often won Mr. America.
Right.
So I walked backstage, and I was frankly very nervous. I've always sort of given myself less credit maybe than other people give me, but I was nervous. I didn't think I was going to do very well, and to some degree, I thought, am I, what am I doing? Am I just crazy for being here? And so somebody saw me and said, "Hey, man, the swim team's down the hall." Suggesting that I wasn't very big, that I looked in my warm-up suit, I look more like a swimmer.
Isn't that amazing that somebody would say that? Think about it.
Yeah. And now what I was going to say was the person who said that probably knew who I was.
Right.
Because if it was someone who didn't know who I was, they wouldn't care. But if someone was expecting me to show up and thought I would be a possible threat, and apparently some people had heard that Brignole was going to go to the California, and they were already talking about how do you think you're going to do. The person that was most expecting me was Ray York.
Ray York, right?
And Ray York was big. Now I don't know if Ray York was the one who said that, but if it was someone like Ray York who was expecting me, that might have been their strategy to try to shake my confidence a little bit.
Like an Arnold psycho.
Like an Arnold, yeah. And I went backstage, and these guys were back there pumping up, and a lot of those guys were huge, were very impressive looking, And I was thinking, oh God, what am I doing here? I'm in the wrong place. What was I thinking? I was dreaming, right? Mm-hmm. But that's because I really wasn't giving myself enough credit, and so. Went backstage. I took off my warm suit.
Let me stop. Were you training under Bill Pearl at that time, or were you past that point?
Well, yeah, no, I was past that. I was training at Bill Pearl's gym, right? But I was also, and I love Bill, and still to this day, love and respect Bill. But I was already thinking beyond the recommendations that Bill was giving me. There were a lot of things that I thought didn't make sense. And then later I would discover they didn't, and I would understand precisely why.
You made a really good point think in one of our other interviews, you said just because, no reflection on Bill, for example, but you said just because someone of high standing or achievement tells you something doesn't mean you shouldn't question it. Something to that effect, right?
Well, I think we should question everything. And if we don't question things, then what we're actually doing is we're shutting off our thinking mechanism and just believing blindly. And that's never good. And I tell people, look, don't believe blindly what I'm saying either. You know, use your thinking mechanism and ask yourself, does that make sense? Research it, Google what I'm saying, test it yourself if you want. At all times. I mean, I am at all times ready to change my outlook on something if I get new information that, you know, throws into question what I believe. But there's a famous saying by a philosopher that says, well, there's two actually that I have in mind. One is the biggest enemy of knowledge isn't ignorance. It's the illusion of knowledge.
Oh, God. Yeah.
So when you think you know, so much so that you refuse to change your perspective, that's the biggest enemy to real knowledge.
That's dogma. Most people are stuck on it.
You're better off not knowing anything, being ignorant, and then having the desire to learn, and everything you learn you accept, right? That you're better off that, even though that's not as good as still keeping yourself thinking all the time.
I'm sorry, I'm not beating up on Bill Pearl here. In fact, actually, I asked Bill to be on here, and he was very gracious, but he's kind of funny. He says, "Oh, nobody wants to listen to me. I'm boring. Get some of these young guys." You know, I know he's had some issues lately. But you did tell me once that Bill told you I think it might have been dips or something, or hand position. He said, "This is the way to do it, Doug." So you went off and did it, and you said it just didn't feel right, and it kind of bugged you internally. Do you remember that?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Is, you know, a lot of people would heed the advice of someone who's a 4-time Miss Universe winner without asking any questions. And I'm not that person. Right. I always listen, and then I explore it, and I test it, and I think, and that doesn't make me a naysayer. In other words, I don't disbelieve everyone. I just quietly think about, you know, whether or not that makes some sense. And I would never go back and say, by the way, Bill, that thing you told me was wrong. No. I don't need to prove a point. I don't need to correct anybody. And as I said, I have a lot of respect for Bill. I love Bill like a father. I mean, he was there for me in the early days. I scrubbed his showers in exchange for membership when I was 15 years old. He took me under his wing. I mean, I'm very, very grateful to him. But, you know, by the time I'd gone to the California, I was already processing a lot of my own revelations and discoveries. And so the point was that, you know, my buddies went backstage and they looked at me and they said, "Holy shit, you are sliced."
Well, is this when the track
after I took my thing off? Yeah. And I was back in a corner so nobody else could see me, but my buddies came back there and said, "Oh my God, that is sick."
Would you say, not always, but oftentimes, I saw that happen many times, as I was never big, but I won a couple of shows, and it was only when I was shredded. And I'm 6 feet, and back in the 80s, you can win something 6 feet, 183. Maybe not now, but it was always a guy who you didn't notice, and he was kind of in the shadows, like you said, loose clothes. And you got the big Michelin guys walking. They sure look impressive, covered up, but it's awfully hard to really be detailed and shredded when you're that big at the end.
Well, I mean, look, the vast majority of bodybuilders that you see in the gym are not detailed and shredded. They are not necessarily symmetrical, right? So it's a very, very small percentage of the bodybuilders that ever get to that level of, I guess you could just call it perfection, where everything is in balance, everything is ripped, nothing is lagging. And, you know, as I was doing the compulsory rounds with the judges, and they were calling this person out, little by little, you could see they were preferring me. They kept calling me back, putting me in the center, you know, bringing me back. So, you know, and then the audience, I mean, obviously I had my friends in the audience, but there were people in the audience that were cheering me on that were not part of my clan. And so my confidence started growing, right? And so I don't know, you probably haven't seen, there's a video of me all grainy, of course, an old kind of video camera that was recording the moment they announced, and the first place overall winner is Doug Brignole.
Was there any question in your head, or did wasn't.
You know what? I'm going to see if I can upload that video.
I'd like to see, wasn't the big guy standing right there with you, the one who?
That's what I'm saying is we were each the division winner. I was the medium tall division winner. There was a tall division winner, which was AAU was height.
Right.
Ray York was tall, and then Joe Fooster was the short division, I think, and then I forgot who the guy was in the medium. So we were all standing there, and then they announced me as first place, and Ray York went.
and then he went.
And his first, I'm over here, right? His first instinct was to go like this, and he goes this way.
and then he went. And then
he came back and he shook my hand, and
then he went and took a dip in the pool, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. No, but I mean, if you look at the pictures now, you would, and you see the three of us together, you would say, yeah, there's no question that I had everything just clearly, distinctly separated. Whereas, other bodybuilders typically that are lean, and part of it is genetics. It's the way their muscles are shaped and where they're placed. It looks like somebody kind of threw clay on their body and it's stuck, but not necessarily in symmetrical order. And
right. Yeah. Would you say one of the hardest things to do, Doug, is to go on stage under unforgiving lights with very little clothing on and throw a pose and people clap for you?
Or don't.
Or don't. Well, what I'm saying is how good you really, the shape you really have to be in to pull that off and be a winner.
Well, look, I mean, for starters, let me just say that right there, what you just described, is the motivation to train hard.
Yes.
Your biggest fear is that you're going to get on stage and make a fool of yourself. And that is what you train so hard for. If you didn't have the prospect of standing on a stage under the lights with an audience in front of you, all by yourself.
Yeah.
If you didn't have that thing staring at your face, down the road, you probably would cut a few workouts short. You might miss a workout. It's that fear. And also, so we're really trying to run away from that fear, avoiding that negative thing and running toward the positive thing that makes us work so hard and achieve great things, that when you put yourself on the spot like that.
Before we go into your book, we got Joey Fulco. Maybe you could touch upon this. He says he'd love to hear your daily diet when not preparing for a show. And the first time I interviewed you about 5-6 years ago, I asked you about, everybody's really big on, white rice versus brown rice. And you kind of shrugged and you said, no, it doesn't matter.
Well, 5 years ago, I was still eating rice. I don't eat rice anymore.
Oh, you don't?
Not at all. I don't eat any high glycemic carbohydrate anymore. I'll tell you why in just a second. But if you look at the glycemic rating of white rice, it isn't significantly higher than the glycemic rating of brown rice. And that was the idea back then, was that we were eating brown rice theoretically because it's going to be absorbed more slowly.
Right.
But the absorption rate addresses the glycemic index, and the glycemic rating isn't very different from those. And brown rice doesn't taste as good as white rice. And it's because it's got the husk, it's more fibrous. And there's an advantage to having a higher fiber diet, but in some people it bothers their digestive system.
Right.
So there's a couple of negatives to the brown rice. But what I was going to say was about 3 years ago, so about 2 years after we talked that way, I had back surgery. I had a herniated disc from years earlier, doing the conventional exercises that I tell people now aren't as good as you think they are. And so an orthopedic doctor was just going to snip that little bulge so it stopped pressing on the nerve. And I had to have a pre-op. And the pre-op is just, general physical exam to make sure you're okay to go under anesthesia. And the doctor that did the pre-op for me was a cardiologist friend of mine who, because he's a cardiologist, he said, listen, as long as you're in here, and as long as I can see on your family health history that your father had heart disease, and since you're 57 years old, why don't we just do this thing called the calcium score, which would tell us, if you have plaque in your arteries, and if so, how much? I said, sure. So we took a test, and it turned out that I had high plaque.
Wow.
Now, this is very surprising. For anyone who's been training 5-6 days a week for years and years and ate, quote unquote, clean. What the hell does clean mean, right? Well, that is such an ambiguous word. We've got to get away from using that word because it doesn't really say what you're de-emphasizing or emphasizing. What does that mean? That you wash the dirt off your food? Clean is ridiculous. Clean back then meant you ate low fat, right? But if you're eating low fat and you're eating high protein, then the difference has to be carbs.
Right.
Right now, back in the day, Albert Beckles and all these guys, all they ever ate was chicken and rice, chicken and rice, chicken and rice. Right? Because we thought back then in the 80s that a complex carbohydrate, being a polysaccharide, many sugared molecule, would take longer to break down and become glucose than either a monosaccharide or a disaccharide, which is 1 or 2 sugar molecule food. So we made the assumption, it was the incorrect assumption, that the simple carbohydrates would spike your insulin, but the complex carbohydrates wouldn't. Now we know different. Now we know that fruit may have a lower glycemic rating, and it won't spike, even though it's a disaccharide, it won't spike your insulin, and rice and potatoes and pasta and bread will. Well, guess what? The American Heart Association had the food pyramid. And at the base of the pyramid, they say, I think some people still go by that food pyramid, grains, pasta, rice, bread, potatoes, rice. At the very, very top, the little tiny triangle at the top, oils and fats. That's wrong.
Yeah,
it's wrong. Okay, because what happens, and the evidence of that was my calcium score exam. So I had and up until recently before then, my cholesterol had always been under 200. It had been 180, 190, and then all of a sudden it spiked, and now at that time it was 290.
Wow.
So now I've got a 290 cholesterol and a test that's telling me that I've got plaque in my arteries. And I'm also noticing that I'm waking up in the middle of the night sweating.
Wow.
Having to change my t-shirt.
Really? Wow.
And then when I would have blood tests, the blood test result, which was a fasting blood test, would show that I had low blood sugar and high insulin in the morning at 8 a.m., even though I hadn't eaten anything since 10 p.m. the night before. So I called my friend up, who is a biochemistry professor, and I said, what's going on here? And he says, it's pretty obvious. It's obvious to anybody who knows biochemistry. I said, what's going on? He goes, you're probably eating according to the American Heart Association guidelines. I said, well, yeah. He goes, that's wrong. That's totally, he goes, that is a recipe. That's the irony. They're not preventing heart attacks. They're causing heart attacks.
Isn't that something?
Unless they've changed their position now. But he said to me, 80% of the cholesterol that's in anyone's arteries at any given point in time is cholesterol they made, not cholesterol they ate. And you're evidence of that. You've got high cholesterol and you're not eating cholesterol. Right. You're not eating fat. He says, do me a favor.
I do know that people who are, it's funny, some doctors, I'm not one of them, but they'll just tell you decrease your stress. Well, like, no kidding. That's not a solution.
Yeah, easier said than done too.
Yeah, but you have something in your bodies, called mast cells, and with high inordinate levels of stress, prolonged period of time, they release cholesterol. So that's kind of self-produced.
Well, so what he said to me is, okay, here's what I want you to do for the next 3 to 4 months. I want you to eliminate all starches and sugars.
Is this before the surgery?
This is, well, no. I mean, the pre-op was a week before the surgery, and then I had the surgery.
Oh, so this didn't affect your surgery?
No. So I had a green light for the surgery because everything tested. This was just sort of an incidental thing that I was going to have to address. So, and by the way, so just to finish up that thing, the doctor said, well, there's no need to panic right now because what this test only tells us is whether or not there's a lot of plaque there. It doesn't tell us where it is. And it doesn't tell us where it's collecting all in one area, narrowing one artery or not. So he says, if it's evenly distributed, then, and there's no narrowing in any one place, then there's no immediate concern. So they did 2 other tests. One is called the nuclear treadmill test, and the other one was another one. I'm not sure if it was angiogram. Anyway, the point was that it was not narrowing any one artery. So I was not an imminent threat of a heart attack. But what he said to me was, keep doing what you've been doing and come and see me again next year. Well, what do you mean keep doing what you've been doing? That's how I got here, doing what I've been doing, right? So, and that's because for the most part, cardiologists are not in the business of keeping people from getting sick. They address the problems after they happen. Right. So what he would do is he would either do a surgery and put a stent in, or he would put you on drugs to, eliminate your cholesterol. So, and then even the technician at the doctor's office said, be sure you eat a low-fat diet. It's like, dude, I'm already eating a low-fat diet, right? That's what got me here, the low-fat diet, right? So he said to me, this friend of mine, Jeff, he said, I want you to eliminate all your starches. I want you to get all your carbohydrates strictly from steamed vegetables. Squashes, broccoli, carrots, zucchini, whatever you want. You can add a little bit of fruit. And then I want you to eat a lot of fat. I want you to eat avocados, olive oil, coconut oil, nuts, nut butter, ghee, yolks, beef. I want 40% of your calories to come from fat sources, 30% from protein, 30% from low glycemic carbohydrates. And then call me, have another blood test, call me and let me know what it says. Did that, called him up. My cholesterol had dropped to 138.
Wow.
From 290 when I was eating high fat.
What period of time did that take?
3 or 4 months.
Okay. All right.
3 or 4 months. And it's because now, of course, that didn't mean that the plaque in my arteries instantly disappeared, but of course it will slowly dissipate as long as you keep your cholesterol down around 150.
Right.
Right. But the point is that insulin is what spikes people's production of cholesterol. So if you're eating a low-fat diet, a low-cholesterol diet, but you're eating bread and pasta, and the reason I was waking up in the middle of the night in sweats was because my blood sugar was dipping, and it was dipping because my insulin was spiking, and the insulin spikes produce cholesterol. If you were to Google deleterious effects or negative effects of constantly elevating insulin production, diabetes, heart disease, immune system problems. I mean, there's all sorts of negatives to having a diet that encourages the production of insulin. So I don't eat any rice anymore.
Just some questions as we go. John Fox asks, would this be considered a ketogenic diet?
No. A ketogenic diet means that you are producing ketones, and you produce ketones only in the absence of carbohydrates. So if you are truly on a ketogenic diet, you'd not even be eating the vegetables. You'd be eating like Atkins. You'd be eating almost all protein and fat, right? This is more like a zone diet. Or it could even be a little bit of a paleo diet, right? Because paleo is basically hunter-gatherer, right? When we ate in paleo days, we ate animal fats.
Would you, Steve Davis, our friend Steve Davis?
Hey, Steve.
I got to get Steve. I got to get Steve on here.
You do have to get him on there.
I've had him before. He's interesting and oblique in his comments. But going back to Joey Fulco, if you could just kind of touch upon, because you get shredded, and I know you stay in generally good shape after the contest, but what's your diet like when not preparing for a show in general?
Well, it's what I just described. It's, every single meal is steamed vegetables, a protein source, either eggs or beef or chicken or salmon, and then olive oil and avocado.
How many meals a day do you do, Doug? 3,
maybe 4.
That's it then. Okay.
Yeah. But then here's the thing is in the olden days when I was eating low fat, then what I was doing was just reducing my calories. But the calories that I was still eating, even though they were diminished, were still coming from high glycemic carbohydrates. So that's why those diets are so painful, is because on the one hand, you're saying to your body, I'm going to deprive you of enough calories to sustain your calorie demand for the day. But at the same time, I'm going to produce insulin, which is going to interfere with your body's ability to release body fat. That's a painful diet.
Talking to you, I want to go work out when I talk to guys like you. I'm feeling that right now, but it's getting late here. Let's get to the book, because we can go all day with this, but really the book is the primary thing we want to talk about, because it is groundbreaking. There's so many things we can ask and talk about. I'll just start you with this, because there's a lot of different things I learned. A lot of people like to deadlift with that reverse-handed grip.
Oh yeah.
Why is that not there? There we go. Physics of Resistance Exercise, everyone. Who's the publisher, Doug?
It's Healthy Learning.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. It's one of the Bibles now, I would say.
That's what my publisher said. He goes, I can see this becoming the Bible.
No, really.
My publisher said, he says, Doug, I've published 600 books, nearly 600 books, and yours is the best one I've ever published.
No kidding.
He
Wow.
said that, yeah.
Well, that's why we have you on here. We got to sell. We got to help the people. So what about that reverse grip on deadlifts? And then you can go into the more, salient stuff.
Well, look, the first thing I'll say is we shouldn't deadlift.
Really?
We shouldn't deadlift.
Okay.
I mean, I will be doing an article soon that explains, the mechanics of what is actually happening during a deadlift, what's working, what's not working, what's in danger, what's not in danger, why, all that stuff. And it's a very, very logical. Once I explain it with illustrations, you'll see it's just not a productive bodybuilding exercise. Right now, you can do, let's say, a moderate weight deadlift, and keeping your back perfectly straight, perfectly arched, and avoid the risk. But there's one thing that's important to know is that the glutes, the hip extension muscles, are much more powerful than the muscles that control your spine, the erector spinae, right? So the mistake that we make is, because we are so competitive with each other, we want to know how much we can deadlift. We want to compete and compare, right? And so at some point you start deadlifting a weight that is not excessive for the glutes, but is excessive for the erector spinae. And that starts to fail first, and your back starts to round, and then you're risking all kinds of herniation problems. If your objective is to work the posterior chain muscles, you can work those without loading your spine at all better. So that's
when I teach university like you do, I hate getting interrupted, and I hate kids who are on their phone and have running conversations. I have a cell phone jammer. They don't know, but I bring it and turn the phones off. That being said, I'm going to interrupt you here and there because people bring up points. Dave Corman, I'm an adherent of Doug's. His ideas work. I've eliminated exercise that are detrimental to my workout longevity. And David Bachman was on the fence, but now he's made up his mind. He's going to order it after the show. Thanks. So there we go.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's very logical stuff. And you've seen that some of the YouTube videos that I've done where I actually have a show and tell, where I actually have devices like this. Yeah. Where I explain, for example, on this device, this is a bicep, this is the forearm, this is the elbow. So I explain that when the bicep contracts, right, it bends the elbow. And the reason I have this is to show that, because somebody had said, well, you shouldn't even do curls. What you should do is bent over barbell row, because when you're doing bent over barbell row, your elbow is doing the same thing, which means your bicep is working, but it's working with heavier weight. I go, well, look at this. Here's what's happening when you're doing a bent over barbell row. Do you see how that bicep is completely flaccid?
Yes.
In other words, when you're doing a row, your forearm is just hanging from the elbow. It's just going along for the ride.
Wow.
Right? The muscles that are lifting the bar are the ones that are attached to the upper arm bone, not the lower arm bone, not the forearm.
Doug, so anyway. excellent information, but I've actually got a couple of members here who did avulse their bicep tendon. They tore the bicep, they got the curtain deformity from doing that. One guy was actually a preacher curls with
from doing deadlift.
Bar. No, one was a preacher curl with a straight bar versus using a cable. As you discussed, the cable is more continuous tension and less of a potential to tear the tendon. And the other one's from the deadlift with the reverse. Why does that happen with the reverse grip like that?
All right. Well, the first thing that I have to address, and it's talked about extensively in the book, is called mechanical advantage and mechanical disadvantage. Okay. So when I do my seminars, I have a device, a lever device that I use to demonstrate. It started off as a seated calf machine, and I took off the seat and I took off the holder of the knee. So all it is just a bar, the pivot, the pedestal, and then on the top of that bar, I welded little hooks all the way along the top. So I say to the audience, imagine that this is your forearm, and that's your elbow right there. So you're holding your forearm parallel with the ground, elbow at 90 degrees, right? And you've got a 10-pound weight. I have a 10-pound weight, and I put it on that machine. And I say, and you're holding your forearm parallel to the ground, how hard do you think your bicep is working? They know it's a trick question, but they go, 10 pounds? Well, let's just see. So what I do is I take my fishing scale and I attach it to a place close to where the wrist would be. And I pull up on it. In other words, I'm not pulling up from the weight itself. I'm pulling back where the wrist is, and it's already 12 pounds. right? And then I move it farther down and it's 22 pounds, and I move it down and it's 34 pounds, and move it down and it's 48 pounds. And I keep moving it down until I get to the final little hook that's very close to the elbow, and I pull up and it's 112 pounds.
Wow.
And that's still only 10 pounds over there. And it has to do with physics. It has to do with the ratio of the distance between the elbow and where you're applying the force, the bicep tendon, and where the bicep tendon is and the weight. And our forearm is about a 12-to-1 ratio. It's about 1 inch from elbow to bicep attachment and about 12 inches from bicep attachment to the hand that's holding the weight. So that's a multiplier of 12. 10 times 12 is 112 pounds, 120 pounds.
I had to read that section a couple of times in the book to make it stick.
So then the next thing I say is, now you'll notice, to the audience, I say you'll notice that every time I pulled up on this scale, I pulled up perpendicular to that forearm bone, right? That's called mechanical advantage. That means all of my effort is being used in the same direction that I want the lever to go. I'm pulling up, I want the lever to go up, right? But instead of pulling straight up, if you pull at a 45-degree angle, halfway between vertical and horizontal, away from the weight, it's twice as much. It takes 240 pounds on the scale to get that lever arm to lift off of its rest with only a 10-pound weight in your hand. Wow. That's mechanical disadvantage, because that means you still need 120 pounds of upward force. We've already proven that. But now, since half of your effort is going up and the other half is going in, you need twice as much, 240, right? So that's how people tear their biceps, is because when you're doing a preacher curl, you have two magnifiers happening at the same time. One magnifier is the fact that that forearm isn't starting vertical. You're already at a 45-degree angle, so you already have at least 50% of the load, and you have the worst mechanical advantage, which is when your bicep is pulling on the forearm almost parallel to it. Oh. You're pulling more toward your shoulder than you are up, and yet you want the bar to go up, but you can't pull from up because you're not over it. You're on the other side of it. Right. So you end up getting a double magnifier. Now, there's a thing I explain in my book where this mechanical advantage and disadvantage only happens in muscles that flex a joint. The bicep flexes the joint. The tricep extends the joint, right? The pectoral muscle flexes. The lat muscle flexes. The hamstring flexes. What are the most common muscle tears? Bicep tears, pec tears, hamstring tears. Why? Because those muscles have a huge range of force that changes from mechanical advantage to disadvantage. And those fibers, in our caveman days, when we used our bicep, we mostly did it with an elbow fully bent. As long as your elbow is at 90 degrees, you're at mechanical advantage. When you're like this, your bicep is able to pull perpendicularly on that thing, right? But when it's straight, it can't. So in my book, I explain that muscles that extend the joints, like the triceps and the quadricep, you'll notice are cross-striated, right?
Right.
Cross-striation is a different kind of muscle. That's called a pennate muscle. In other words, the bicep has straight fibers, the hamstring has straight fibers, the pectorals have straight fibers, and the extension muscles tend to have cross-hatching fibers. In other words, extension muscles never get a chance to have mechanical advantage. They're always pulling from a disadvantage because the limb that they're operating never gets to face them the way it does on a bicep, right? And so that means they've adapted to have more power, more force. And so imagine a pennate muscle with all these little cross-hatching striations is like a bicycle that has a low gear, right? A low gear means it travels shorter distance, but it gives you more ease. So when you have all these little cross-striating muscles, they don't contract as far, they contract short, but there's more of them and they contract with more force. So that's why the bicep is especially vulnerable.
Doug, I'm losing you just a little.
Ah, I can hear you just fine.
I don't know if you moved the camera or something.
No, I haven't done anything.
Seems like you're back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Anyway, and so the bicep is the most vulnerable of the flexion muscles. The pectoral is the second most vulnerable. But whenever we whenever we're analyzing an exercise, you're trying to analyze where the force is, where the resistance is, when it occurs, right? So we know that all levers load their corresponding muscles the most when they're horizontal, when they're perpendicular to gravity. And that's a magnifier. And we also know that muscles are stronger in the beginning of the range of motion than at the end of the range of motion. But you also have to understand mechanical disadvantage, because that's also a magnifier. So when you're doing a curl in the standing position, like a standing dumbbell curl or standing barbell curl, even though your forearm is starting in the neutral position, you still have to factor in the magnifier, the mechanical disadvantage. Even the smallest amount of weight gets magnified about 10 times just because of the mechanical disadvantage. That's why they tear when you do deadlifts, because your arm is mostly vertical, but not quite, and you're mechanical disadvantage. And you're starting to pull with your bicep, and it doesn't take much to rip it.
Hey Doug, you do phone consultations. I have done numerous phone consultations with Doug. I have his book. It is the best thing anybody can do is get the book. Follows good guidelines. That's Scott.
Hey Scott, nice to see you.
So are you still available to do phone consultations with people if they're interested?
I would say yes, but not to an unlimited degree. I mean, obviously I keep a pretty busy schedule, so it's not like if I had 30 requests tomorrow that I'd be able to attend to them all.
Hey Doug, you're kind of cutting out a little. I don't know why.
I don't know why. I mean, I'm on Wi-Fi here. I'm totally wired in.
No, it was going really well until about 2 minutes ago. Well, I can still understand you. This is something you and I went over a few years ago. I remember I asked you about squatting, and the issue was some people get more out of it than others. And you mentioned things like pelvic disposition, femur length, patellar tracking problems, and arch problems as well in the foot. You mentioned those 4 things that can make a big difference, where one person gets a lot out of a squat and another person, they don't even feel any proper stimulation.
I think you're mistaken. I've never mentioned those things, arch of the foot or patella tracking. I've never mentioned those things. There are other significant problems with a squat. They would make you forget about squat and say, why would I bother worrying about my arch or patella tracking when there's these other really, really big problems associated with a squat that basically preclude you from wanting to do it.
Just checking audio. People say they can hear you fine, so as long as they can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, Doug. So, Doug, what are some of the things that people can most benefit from the book? Because there's so much information, but some of the things people would really be better off knowing going not to do.
If I wanted to simplify it, I would just say this, that number one, traditional methods work, but they don't work efficiently. And when we talk about efficiency, we're talking about cost, effort, consequence ratio, right? So the ideal ratio would be you get the most amount of benefit with the least amount of effort and the least risk of injury. That's efficient, right? If I said to you, why don't you do this exercise over here? You'll get the same benefit, but it'll cost you 2 or 3 times more effort and you'll have a higher risk of injury. You should say, well, then why would I want to do that if the benefit is no greater than it would be with this other method that gives me no risk of injury and much less effort, right? That's how we should be thinking. So imagine that I'm going to drive this vehicle 10 miles to that destination over there, and I'm going to drive it on a dirty, muddy, wet road. Rocks everywhere, right? I'm going to get there, but my car's going to take a beating and my tires are going to spin, which means that I'm spending gas without getting traction. I'm wasting energy. And by the time I get there, and I will get there, and if all I look at is the fact that I got there to prove that my method was good, then I'm a fool. I should look at the cost. What did it cost me to get here? Right? i.e. Ronnie Coleman, right? What did it cost him to get there? Now, someone who's already paid the price will easily say, well, you know what, it was worth it. Well, you say that now because you have to justify what it cost you. You have to feel good about. But if I can tell you mathematically and in logical terms why you could have gotten the exact same result using these other methods that eliminate or greatly eliminate the risk of injury and drastically reduce the cost of effort, you should be interested. In other words, would you pay $3 million for the same house you could buy for $1 million?
Hey, Don, I'm sorry. I want to ask you, I don't mean to cut you off because everybody can hear you except me, but that's okay. One thing I did change learning from you, I used to do pull downs with the straight bar, lats, and now I do the single arm cable pulls for
Much
the
better.
lats.
Yeah.
Why is that superior to pulling down from both arms overhead?
Well, there's three things that we have to pay attention to. And underneath those three things, there's smaller nuances. But number one is the direction of anatomical motion. We want to know that each movement, each exercise that we do is precisely what that muscle does and not, some kind of diluted version of what that does. For example, the pectoral muscle will pull my humerus toward the origin, from the outside to the inside, from a lateral angle, medially to the center of my body. That's the direction of motion. When I do dips, I do this. All right, so I'm not elongating the pec and I'm not shortening the pec, as would occur when I'm doing a dumbbell press. All right, so that's an example of an inappropriate or diluted anatomical motion. All right, you're not doing what the pec muscle does best. The second category is a direction of resistance. The direction of resistance has certain criteria. Did you disappear? Did I lose you? I don't hear you and I don't see you. All right, maybe I can still be heard. Anyway, the direction of resistance matters a lot because in the direction of resistance determines the resistance curve of the exercise, where that muscle will experience more resistance or less resistance in the range of motion. It also determines where the risk is, right? So when, it's a little bit difficult to explain exercise by exercise without having any visuals. But the direction of resistance matters an awful lot. The other thing is the, what do you say here? He's trying to get back on. All right. It looks like I'm still being recorded here, so I'm going to keep going. The other thing that matters is there are neurological triggers. There are neurological triggers. He's back. I think he's back. There he is. I'm gonna keep going so the viewers can still hear me. There are neurological things that happen during some exercises that determine whether or not there's any diminishment of benefit. Whether there's any weakening. And this is one of the reasons why squats is problematic for someone who's trying to get muscle development, right? If your goal is to compete against other people who are squatting, well, then you have to squat, right? I think that's sort of a fool's errand. I think it's sort of silly to compete with other people on how much you can lift because there will always be someone who can lift more than you. I always say this, most of us don't know who holds the world record for chin-ups. So as we try to reach that next 20 or the 30, we're so far from there you are. We're so far from the record of 1,200 and whatever that it almost doesn't even matter. And you still don't even know who the record holder is. Anyway, so there are neurological things that happen, for example, when we do squats, right? So our body has a thing called reciprocal innervation. And reciprocal innervation basically says that you cannot contract opposing muscles simultaneously. Your body will not allow it. It will send a relaxation synapse to the muscle that is on the opposite side with an opposite function of the working muscle. When you're doing bicep curls, your triceps are shutting off by way of the central nervous system. It's not a choice. It's automatic, right? So anytime that we're lifting any kind of weight, you can be guaranteed something is being shut off by the central nervous system. So when you're doing squats and you're activating the glutes, which are hip extensors, hip flexors are shut off. One of the hip flexors is the rectus femoris, which is the center part of the quadricep. It's the 25% of your quadricep. While you're squatting, they've done EMG studies and have shown this, you're getting almost zero activation of the rectus femoris. 25% of your quadricep when you're squatting, anytime you're doing any kind of two joint, hip and knee, leg press, hack squat, not sissy squat, hack squat, leg press, anything like that, anytime you're engaging the glutes, at the same time you're engaging the quads, you're going to get this compromise of the rectus femoris. Same thing happens to the hamstring. The hamstring gets shut off anytime the quadricep gets activated. Well, when you're doing a squat, you're certainly loading your quadriceps, or the remaining 3 parts of the quadricep, shutting off your hamstring, and the hamstring assists in hip extension, but it's now mostly shut down. So it's compromising your ability to do hip extension well. So, there's mechanical problems with the squat too. The fact that your lower leg only dips forward about 30 degrees, it's far from being a fully active lever. You're only getting 30% of the load on your quadricep. You're only getting about half the load you could get on your glutes because the lower leg is doubling under the upper leg bone. So it's reducing its femur length, and that's a magnifier. So while you're getting these mechanical reductions of resistance, you're also getting these neurological interferences. So if your objective is to get maximum glute development and maximum quad development, squats or leg presses are not the way to do it.
Hey, Doug, Cody Huskins asked a good question. I've seen you write this. What about incline presses for the chest? I've heard you said that it wasn't effective.
It's not effective. I mean, there may be a slight participation, but it's certainly not a majority participation. And the explanation is simple. All muscles pull toward their origin. And in fact, anything will pull towards its origin, right? If I give you a rope and I tie the other end of that rope to a heavy box and I say, pull on that rope, guaranteed that box will move toward you. You cannot make that box move in any direction other than toward you. So if you were a muscle origin and that rope was a muscle fiber and that box was a limb, that limb would be going toward you, right? So when you're doing, if you put your arms out like this, you realize that your pectoral muscles are 100% below your arm line. There's no pectoral muscle above the arm line, nothing above the sternum, right? So when you're doing a flat press, you're already moving to the highest part of the pecs. If you go like this, you're moving towards your chin. There's no pectoral muscles on your chin. And from an evolutionary standpoint, we evolved from quadrupeds. Eventually we became primates. Eventually we became hominids. And eventually we became Homo sapiens, right? But we never, in our evolutionary history, we never had to move our arms in an inclined direction. So the shoulder joint nor the pectoral muscle did not evolve to accommodate that movement, right? We push straight forward and various directions of downward. And that's, if you talk to a paleontologist, they're basically, detectives for what our early predecessors used to do. And they can look at a shoulder joint, they can look at where the muscles work and then say, this is how that anatomy worked. Well, that is how our anatomy developed. It developed to push forward and progressive degrees of downward, but never upward and certainly not overhead.
Hey, Doug, we're limited on time, unfortunately. We only have an hour tonight, 7 minutes left in that realm. But I wanted to mention something Jerry Brainham mentioned and your take on it. And he said that it's true. Well, Cody has another thing here. Hold on. I've seen old footage of Arnold doing incline presses and his pecs were pumping up like a balloon. Well, that's Arnold.
Well, not only is it Arnold, it's like, Arnold had great pecs, right? And he did inclines, but he also did regular flat bench. He did decline press. He did flies. He did dumbbells. He did cables. If you're brushing your teeth and your forearms are bulging, it doesn't mean that brushing your teeth builds your forearms, right? So you can't use that. You have to use something that's absolute. You can't use the picture of a guy who's got a good development and say that's evidence, right? You have to understand, if you talk to an engineer, there's just no way that your pectoral muscles can move your arms toward your chin because they're not attached to the chin.
Right.
Period. It's just logic. And the better test would be, and I have lots of people who have done this, who have shown me pictures of their chest, and they say, I've been doing only decline presses since I read your book, and my upper pecs are better than they were when I used to do incline presses.
Wow. Mike Keeler, but the rectus femoris extends the hip during the squat, or am I confused?
No, the rectus femoris does both. It isn't only a hip flexor. It is the only muscle of the quadricep that crosses 2 joints. And so, yes, it wants to extend the knee, but it can't participate because it's getting a relaxation synapse from the central nervous system. You can check there was one guy that posted a report. I'll think of his name in just a second. And he posted a chart and he showed the EMG study that showed that the rectus femoris was completely shut off during squats because of the deactivation caused by the reciprocal innervation. So yes, if that, and by the way, the rectus femoris does participate in all other knee extension exercises when the glutes are not involved. Yes, it is a knee extender. There's no doubt of that. But only when it's not interfered with. You were getting back to Jerry Branham.
Oh yes, Jerry Branham and others have postulated that high reps versus low reps and heavier weight. High rep, lightweight workouts to failure will build just as much hypertrophy as heavy weight with low reps, only you won't get the strength. What's your take on that?
Okay, the first thing that we have to understand is that muscle growth happens by way of when you recruit the most number of muscle fibers. Recruitment is key, right? So then we have to ask, when does the recruitment happen? Well, it happens when you lift heavy weight, heavy as a percentage of your maximum, let's say 80%, 85% or more of your maximum, gives you immediate recruitment of a large percentage of muscle fibers, but so does extensive fatigue. Okay, so yes, you will get recruitment with lightweight and high reps, but not until you get to the end of your set when you have so much fatigue that those fibers have no choice but to contribute to the effort. Okay, here's the problem. When they did that study, they say we're going to do one set and we're going to measure. One set high weight, low reps, one set lightweight, high reps. Look under a microscope, same amount of muscle growth. End of study. Well, no, not end of study, right? Nobody would expect to get the most amount of muscle growth with a one set of heavy weight for, let's say, 6 or 8 reps, right? Because one of the factors is volume, right? So volume does also contribute to muscle growth. If you only do one set and you compare one light and one heavy, yes, you get the same amount of muscle growth. But doing more sets gives you more growth. And you can't do too many sets with that kind of fatigue, because once you experience that degree of fatigue, that degree of lactic acid production, then you pretty much limit how many total sets you can do. Whereas if you do heavy, low reps, you can do multiples of those. So what I typically do is I start with a high rep, low weight set. I might start off with 50 reps. I might start off with 40. I might start off with 30. I add weight and reduce the reps. And I work my way toward 8 reps or 6 reps or maybe even 4 reps. And I don't burn out in the early sets, right? I don't want to create too much fatigue. But if you don't warm up that muscle, you will not be as strong with the heavier weight. So yes, under a microscope, it's true that they both produce the same amount of growth, but you're not going to get as much overall growth because you can't do as much volume. And you do get more systemic fatigue from high rep, low weight sets. And then systemic fatigue then slows down your rate of recovery.
You know, it's like my friend Frank Zane says, it's important to make a lightweight feel heavy. I'm really good at that.
Well,
it's a matter of the muscle doesn't know how much weight it's lifting. It's an abstract. It only knows the resistance. And I know you know that, of course. Joey Foco says, Doug, just confirm things I did back in the day. It's like making a direct path to the muscle. You know, Joey Foco was, Teenage Mr. USA back in.
Right, yeah. We competed back together in the teenage days.
Oh, you competed with him, I think, right?
Yeah. Were
you with Defendus too, John Defendus?
I don't remember competing against John Defendus. When I competed in the '83 Mr. America, Jesse Gautreaux was there, Billy Arlen was there, Rick Poston was there. Of course, Jeff King won that year. He was fantastic. There was another guy Marty Vraniker was in a different division, but he was there. So in fact, Lee Haney competed in the same Mr. America, Teenage Mr. America that I competed in, but he didn't win that year.
When you saw Haney in the teen contest, could you tell he was going to go far?
He was not in my division.
What's that?
He was not in my division. I didn't even know that he was in that same contest until I looked at muscle memory, and then I saw that he was in the same contest. But I didn't see him there that day. We were in different divisions.
Hey, David Bachman checked out Amazon. He says delivery of book is estimated 3 to 5 weeks. Are there other places to order quicker? Thanks.
Yes, you can order from me at DougBrignole.com, or you can order from the publisher at HealthyLearning.com.
Yeah, I'm going to type those in for people. Unfortunately, we've got to go.
I'm so sorry. We'll have to do it again.
I'll bring it. Most definitely, we'll have you on next week if you could do it. We'll do part 2.
Great. Absolutely, yeah.
There's a lot. We barely scratched upon things, but I probably timed this badly because I'm.
Let me just tell you one thing in reference to what you just said. 90% of 100 pounds is 90 pounds.
That's right.
30% of 300 pounds is 90 pounds. Right? So, a lot of us want to lift 300 pounds because we think we're working harder. But in reality, if we're using inefficient mechanics, we could be getting no more load on that muscle than 100 pounds could give us with better mechanics.
Right. Well, Cody agrees. I'm a firm believer that lightweight benefits more. I think Frank said you want to make 135 pounds feel like it's 315. Well, of course, with me, it feels like that anyhow. I was never, I got to say, I was never blessed with a lot of strength, so I probably focused a little too much on form and, exactness.
I don't think you can focus too much on form, and I don't think it matters how much you can lift. What matters is whether or not you're being challenged in that set, period.
That's correct. Right. And, I've got to say, knock on wood, I've never been injured in the gym in any way.
Yeah.
After 40-something years. So,
But
I've been injured outside.
A way to train.
Yeah. I mean, and using your book. So folks, we're going to have Doug back on, hopefully within the week, and we'll talk more. We'll stick mostly to the book. We talked about Rick Drasin, rest in peace, of course, and some of Doug's history, which is very colorful.
By the way, I'm trying to take over his show now.
Are you going to take over his show?
I'm trying to be the host of the Rick Drasin show.
Oh, no kidding.
We're going to see if it works. I mean, a lot of people are asking me to do that. I just need the permission from the kids. But I think that's the best way to honor his legacy. Well,
that's great. He really ran a great show. And Joey, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Joey. Good seeing you, buddy.
You had some good input. Maybe we'll have your daughter come back on and sing some songs. Doug has tons of knowledge, info. Really loved his interviews with the late Rick Drasin. So yeah, you're gonna be taking that over. I think that's fantastic. So
fingers crossed.
Well, Doug, look, I really want to thank you. I know everybody here can hear you. It's choppy for me, but as long as we disseminate the information for the people.
By the way, I stayed on. When you checked out, I stayed on.
Yeah.
I did a little seminar there.
Yeah. Well, I have the book. So I've had the advantage of having the book for over a year.
Right.
And I'm already reading through for the second time. So, Doug, thanks. Doug, I'll send you a copy of this so you can post it on your page, and I'll send you some other info. So, again, how can they get the book once again?
Well, you can go to my website, dougbrignole.com, or you can go to the publisher, healthylearning.com. Of course, if you want me to sign it, you got to get it from me, because otherwise it's too indirect to get it from him. He has to send it to me. I stock these books. I just got another delivery in today. So, I'll just sign it and send it, and I'll get it to you in a week. Assuming that I've got books in stock, I'll get it to you within a week.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a little quicker than 3 to 5 weeks Amazon for some reason.
Well, Amazon doesn't stock it, as I said, so it's going to be a delay because they have to order it and get it. It's very indirect, and Amazon's not taking orders overseas, and I'm shipping overseas.
Well, David he wants a signed one, so he's taking it directly from you.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that.
All right, Doug, thanks so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Our next guest is going to be Doug once again, so look for that within a week or a little after that, and we'll figure that out. And everybody, thanks again for the happy birthdays and all that. I'm just glad.
Happy birthday, Michael.
Everybody.
Okay.
All right, hey, it's an honor, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay.
Have a great night.